Hi everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Natalie. I'm the College of Alameda's Outreach and Retention Specialist. I'm very excited that you're all here today, but I'm especially excited that Favianna Rodriguez is here with us today. Just to keep it a little bit unbiased, I'm gonna read her bio directly as it is printed before I add in my own 2 cents. So Favianna Rodriguez is a transnational interdisciplinary artist and cultural organizer. Her art and collaborative projects deal with migration, global politics, economic injustice, patriarchy, and interdependence. Rodriguez lectures globally on the power of art, cultural organizing, and technology to inspire social change, and leads art workshops at schools around the country. Favianna's mission is to create profound and lasting social change in the world. Through her bold and provocative art, she has already touched the hearts and minds of millions. In addition to her fine arts and community work, Rodriguez partners with social movement groups around the world to create art that's visionary, inspirational, radical, and most importantly, transformational. When Favianna is not making art, she is directing Culture Strike, a national arts organization that engages artists, writers, and performers in migrant rights. In 2009, she co-founded Presente.org, a national online organizing network dedicated to the political empowerment of Latino communities. Without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to welcome Favianna Rodriguez today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to connect with all of you because I was born and raised in Oakland, and so this is my neighborhood. You know, Alameda is kind of an extension of Oakland, although people wouldn't think of it in that way. And so I want to talk to you today about art and activism and how I leverage art to address the issues that I very much care about, which include immigration, women's equality, and climate change. So I'll talk first about what it was like for me to grow up in California, in the Bay Area. Those are my 2 parents. And I grew up, I was going to high school during the era of Proposition 187. So there was a time here in California when California was a very anti-immigrant state. And we also just loved to lock people up. You know, California used to be one of the states that most incarcerated people. I mean, now we're one of the states that has really progressive policies, but it wasn't like that. And when I was a teenager, I was very active in protesting and in also just really understanding the way in which politics affects all of our lives and the ways in which laws affect our lives. And I noticed that a lot of times politicians would create these stories and these narratives that were very harmful to our community. So for example, when Reagan created this narrative around the war on drugs, and we saw how many people of color were incarcerated as a result, I was like, oh wow, this president is creating very anti-Latino and anti-Black narratives that are actually driving policy. And similarly, I remembered when Clinton passed NAFTA in 1994, NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement, and how he talked about that there would be no borders between the US, Canada, and Mexico, and that there would be free trade. And yet that same year, they started building the US-Mexico border. So I felt that there was a lot of contradictions in politics, but I felt that it was important for people of color to tell their story. And that's how I really got inspired to become an artist, was that I felt it was important to have a voice. And this is one of my earliest pieces. It's called Raw. And it shows it's a self-portrait of myself looking on the mirror. And on the left, I'm wearing white, and on the right, I'm wearing black. And what this was for me was a way to talk about the fact that I had grown up really surrounded by whiteness as a standard of beauty. And what that meant is that every time that I looked in magazines or I went to go see a film, the central protagonists were always white women. And white women and white men were held up as this ideal of who we should strive to be. And yet, as a Latina, I didn't see positive representations of myself in the arts or in film or in music. And it really inspired me to be an artist so that I could create my own content, my own work that really reflected myself and the communities that I came from. And so in this piece, when I'm wearing white, I'm also blinded, because the other thing is racism and white supremacy, really. White supremacy means that we live in a world where the needs and the stories and the narratives of mostly white people are held up and centralized. And that's the world that we live in, unfortunately. And so in this piece, what I'm doing is I'm taking off those blinders and I'm embracing who I am as a woman of color. The other thing, my father was black. He was an African Peruvian, Afro-Peruano. And I think that often in Latinos, we forget that, that slavery happened in Mexico and in Peru, and in places like Brazil, and that as Latinos, we also have, we are descendants of Africans. And so for me to grow up in a mixed family like that also very much impacted me, because I would watch, Spanish language TV, and I would watch novelas, and I would be like, why is everyone in this soap opera light skin? Like, Latinos don't look like that. So it became very apparent to me that this notion of white supremacy, which translates differently in Latin American culture, was just very present. And as an artist, I've strived to fight against that. That's why in this piece, I'm wearing something that says raw, which is really a statement that I want to be myself. I want to love myself as a woman of color, and I want to just really embrace who I am and not try to live up to any kind of fake ideals. This is another one of my art pieces, and it's a wave. And for me, art helps create the waves of change. Art inspires us to see something that we may not have seen before. The movie Black Panther is a great example of that, as is the movie Wonder Woman, which is that in Black Panther, we see a world for the first time that has never been colonized. That white people never arrived to try to colonize Wakanda. And to me, that was something that was very significant, because I was like, we do need to tap into our imagination as artists. And we need to think about, what does it take to create a wave of change? And what it takes our stories. It takes for us to really share what's happening, what we've experienced, and how this world has affected us, and what we need to do to transform it. But it really requires us to tap into the power of our imagination. And I say that because we need to make up the future. Like, what is a future in which racism doesn't exist? Like, what does that look like, right? I think we're so used to growing up in a culture where we center white lives that we can't even imagine what it's like to not, be a person of color and always be seen as an outsider. And especially also to be targeted. I grew up in East Oakland, and as far as I can remember, the police were always harassing myself and my friends. And I'm just like, I don't want to live in a world where I'm always having to be hyper aware of my safety. So as an artist, I want to imagine what would be like for me to walk around freely, not worry about what I look like, but also just to feel safe. And so that's what I do as an artist, is I try to think about, what is this world that we can create? What are the images? What are the stories that will require us to think differently? The other thing is, I see culture and art as a pillar of social change. In other words, we can't have social change without culture. And this is very important, because often when we think of social change, we just think of politics. But it also has to, social change can be achieved if we also, if in our imagination and in our head, we are ready to go there, right? How many of you saw the TV show the first time that Ellen DeGeneres came out on television? How many of you saw that show? Okay, well, that was 1997. It was the first time you had a gay character on TV ever. Okay, so imagine that we had Ellen first in 1997. Then we had Will and Grace. Then we had shows like The L Word, right? And now it's very normal to see gay characters on screen. In fact, now there's even transgender characters on screen, which is very important in terms of visibility. But how long did it take? It took almost 20 years to normalize that. And so imagine if you can, turn on TV or go to the movies or go to a museum, and it's normal to see Latinx and Asian and Native American and Black stories. That's not normal right now. Right now, we barely get Black Panther. That's like the first time that we have a major superhero blockbuster that is predominantly Black characters. Okay, that doesn't exist for Asians, it doesn't exist for Latinos, but that's where we have to strive to be. So for me, culture is such a vital part of social change, as is everything in the cultural industry, which includes television, film, music, the arts, gaming. So culture is power. If we can transform the stories that we see and tell, we can change our world. And just so that you know the power of this, let's think about, for example, the Me Too movement, right? The Me Too, last year, just a few people started sharing their stories. It took 2 stories to begin to take down a very powerful white man named Harvey Weinstein. It took 2 stories. Then all the stories started coming out. And that's what is important, is that it takes just sometimes 1 or 2 stories. Did you know that the death, the killing, the murder of Trayvon Martin is what started Black Lives Matter? Because the organizers of Black Lives Matter, they heard Trayvon's story, they heard his mom, and they said, okay, we need to organize a movement. This needs to end. So stories are very, very powerful. Sometimes you just need 1 or 2 stories, and then before you know it, everything is breaking open. So for me, I think it's very important to understand that we have a lot of power in changing culture by telling our stories. This is one of my very popular pieces. It's called Migration is Beautiful. It's also the shirt that I'm wearing. And I was very much inspired by the Black is Beautiful movement, which happened also during the Civil Rights era. But what I wanted to say was that migration is a natural and beautiful thing that all species do. Butterflies migrate, fish migrate, whales migrate, birds migrate, everything migrates. Humans have migrated. Our ancestors migrated. They moved, they walked. It is what people do. People always have been in movement. It's just that now we live in a world where mostly men, mostly white men, are putting up walls and they're saying, nope, you're staying out and we're staying in. But it's so interesting to me because if you really look at how Europeans got to this land, they also immigrated. You know what I mean? And I think that unfortunately we live in a world where people celebrate the immigration of mostly Europeans. But if you're Black African, or if you come from Iran, or if you come from Mexico or Honduras, you're not celebrated. In fact, they don't want you. And I think this is racism at work, which is that we at a global level, if you think about it, colonialism, colonization, Britain went everywhere. They went to places in Africa and Asia, they colonized. So did the Spanish, right? And so when they went, they were like, oh, we're gonna take all your gold, we're gonna take all your chocolate, all your tea, everything you got going for you, we're gonna take. So do people wonder why it is that now people are migrating back to the same places that invaded them? It's because when the colonial forces went and they basically took all the resources. Well, if you don't have resources, then how are you gonna survive? So that's why people migrate. People are migrating because we came, well, not we, but the powerful colonial powers came and they stole their shit. So now they're saying, hey, you know what? You stole everything. I can't even live off my land anymore because you took all my corn, and now you are putting a trademark on it, Monsanto. So how do I survive? And of course I'm going to immigrate back to you because you got rich off my back. And this is also what I think is so fascinating. We have to remember the United States became a global force because it exploited people. It had free labor through slavery. That's why the United States is so rich, is because it became a global force by exploiting in a very ruthless way African slaves. And then they exploited the Chinese. And then they exploited the Mexicans for sure. They definitely took away the land of the Native Americans. So we have to understand that this is wealth that's built up. So when we live in a world in which most wealthy people in this country are white, well, you have to ask, where did that wealth come from? It really came from exploitation and from our communities. And I think that we need to clearly understand it, because if you look at who are the poorest people in the country today, it's blacks and Latinos. We are the poorest people, and I find it so disgusting, because we are also the people who were most exploited in order to build this wealth. And so in my art, I really try to talk about these big themes and to show that we are strong and powerful, and that we need to have messages that are about our power. Because often we're talking about what we're against, right? So we say, okay, I'm against police brutality. I'm against deportations. I'm against sexism. You know, but then what are we for? We have to be able to say also what we care about and what does the world that we want to live in look like, right? So I want to live in a world where I can love whoever I want, and I can freely walk down the street and not have to be harassed, and I don't ever have to deal with police profiling me or my loved ones. That's the world I want to live in. And I also don't want to work myself to death. So I do my artwork in many different places. With the butterfly, you know, I make these costumes, I make these poster parties where people can use the art themselves and also make a statement. So the other thing, now I'm going to share a little bit about what it was like for me growing up. So I grew up here in East Oakland in the Fruit Belt, and I grew up in an immigrant family. Like I told you, my father was Afro-Peruvian. My mom is light-skinned Peruvian. They both immigrated here to the United States in the 60s, and they met here, and then I was their first child. And my parents never went to college. They just finished high school, so for them, it was very important that I get an education. In fact, that's all they cared about. They really, I mean, I had to get straight A's. I was like a 4.2 student. I would go to Saturday engineering camp and summer engineering camp, and I would have a math tutor. And it was all about like getting good grades. That's what my parents really stressed. And also, my parents were the kind of parents, you may have had parents like this, who are basically like, keep your legs closed, don't get pregnant, right? They instilled a lot of fear messages in me that really ended up affecting me tremendously, because I did not have the tools to be able to navigate my sexuality. Because I was so, you know, I was definitely a straight A student, but my parents never talked to me about sex. And of course, what happens when your parents don't talk to you about sex? Well, you got to go figure it out on your own, and then you make all kinds of mistakes, which I definitely did. But then when I went to UC Berkeley, so I got a full ride to go to UC Berkeley, so I went to Cal, and I was, for the first time, living in a co-ed co-op, right? Co-ed with all Chicanos, Latinx people, and of course I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. You know, I've never lived in a co-ed space. And I was definitely very sexually active. And I got pregnant my third year in college. So when I told my partner at the time that I was pregnant, he disappeared. I never saw him again. And I was really sad about it, because I was like, oh my God, I thought this person loved me, right? He said he loved me. But you understand, like, when you grow up in a culture that never talks to you about sex or relationships, your idea and your concept is very skewed. My notion of reality was very skewed because I had not had any exposure to what it was like to date people or be in a relationship. And obviously people took advantage of that. And I was not able to negotiate for what I wanted, because my whole life I was told that I had to keep my legs closed. And so it's a very disempowering kind of message, right? I believe that we actually should be telling teenagers, we should be openly talking about sex to teenagers, and we should be giving all people the tools for them to have the kinds of relationships that they want to have. We should not withhold information. We should give information. So I got pregnant, and I did not want to have a kid. I really didn't. I still don't. I don't want to be a mom. I know that. I'm going to be 40 years old, and I still know I don't want to be a mom. But I definitely didn't want to when I was 20 years old, and I was in the middle of my art career. You know, I was getting ready to move to LA, like my art thing was really blowing up. So I decided to have an abortion. And it was the best decision that I ever made, because I realized that, I wasn't ready. And not just that, like my partner had just like totally left me. So I was on my own, and I did not want to tell my parents. I knew they would totally not be happy. So Planned Parenthood helped me, and I was able to get an abortion. It was easy, and I recovered, and I felt really good about it. But I did not share my story for almost 10 years. In other words, I was in the closet about my abortion for 10 years. And I share it now because in this country, 1 in 3 women have an abortion. 1 in 3. That's like 1/3. And we should not live in shame and stigma. To me, this is what it means to come out about your story. You have to tell your story. If you don't tell your story, people are going to write laws that actually get in your way. And right now, even though we have had abortion to be legal in this country, we still have people trying to write laws to get rid of that right. And I, as someone who has experienced it, I don't believe that people should be forced to bring in, so I'm not talking to you, Siri. Siri thinks I'm talking to her. We should not be forced to have to like create a living thing inside of us and then put it out into the world. It's like, that is so unjust to me. So I speak out as much as I can about abortion, and I also speak out about the fact that Latinos need to be talking more about sex. In our families, we need to stop the silent stigma. And I know it's in a lot of families of color, it's the same thing, where people just do not talk about sexuality, and the only messages we hear are fear messages. So if you're queer, like if you actually want to experiment, you have an even harder time, because not only is your family not going to talk to you about sex, probably, most likely, there's a lot of homophobia, right? The same thing in my culture, there was a lot of homophobia. So as an artist, I felt that it was really important for me not just to make a statement, but to really speak my mind, and to be free about it. So in this poster, which says that I'm a slut, I really wanted to just say, you know what, I got called a slut when I was in high school, and I was just always, well, what is a slut? Like, what is the mathematical equation to be a slut? Because I find it really just unjust that men get celebrated for being sexually active, but women get punished for being sexually active. And yet, frankly, like, we are all human beings. All human beings want to be touched. All human beings want to make physical connection with human beings. It is in our nature to be connecting to other human beings in healthy ways. So I don't believe this whole thing about, that there's a difference between our sexual appetites. I think we've all been conditioned to believe that, but those are lies. And I think that it's very important to help young people be able to explore, first with themselves, because I definitely believe that everyone needs to learn how to touch themselves before you let someone else touch you, but you have to be able to communicate. You have to say, hey, you know what, I like to be touched in this way. This is what I like. This is what I want. This is what will make me feel good. And we don't live in a culture that raises people like that, especially women. Especially young women don't get trained we don't get those tools. On the contrary, we get raised to be passive and to just take it and to just basically please other people. So for me, it's really important. I'm also queer, and it's very important for people to be able to just, get the love that you want to receive and to try to be healthy about it instead of getting into these dynamics that are very dangerous. So the other piece, this one is one of my Sluts for Open Borders pieces. I care about many different things, and I care about good border policy. So I did this piece just to show, we need open borders. We need to just embrace people. If people are making the dangerous journey to leave their homes, then why don't we support them? Why don't we really try to figure out how to support immigrants and refugees? So the other thing is that I'm an environmentalist, and I very much care about the earth, and I care about how we take care of our only home. And we only have one home. We can only live in one planet, and that planet is Earth. And in many of our neighborhoods, in many of our communities, we are dealing with the effects of climate change, especially here in California. I mean, when y'all remember the fires, you remember the drought, that is climate change. And that means that our Earth is getting hotter, and it's disrupting all the patterns of what we used to know, right? Everything from like rain season to dry season, it's all being disrupted. The fires are incredibly affecting all of the state. So I want to just tell you a little story, which is where I grew up and what happened in that place. So this is my neighborhood in the Fruitvale. You see that I live right next to the 880 freeway, right? And you also see the 580 freeway is up on top. You all see that? Okay, I'm going to show you another map now. So in this other map, you see that white dot? That's my home. That's where I grew up. That's where I live. So this is the air quality in my neighborhood. And you see that it's red. You see that? It's red. This is California air standards, which are among the most strictest in the nation. And in my neighborhood, I live in a very, very dirty neighborhood with dirty air that causes asthma and that makes people very sick. Can anyone guess why it's red? Why is that area red? Yes, a lot of people of color live here, but what causes bad air?
Environmental racism.
Environmental racism, factories, what else? There's a freeway. What goes down that freeway that is creating bad air? Trucks. It's trucks. Trucks are burning a lot of fossil fuels. That's why in my neighborhood, I can clean this in 2 days. I go like that, and my finger is full of a very tiny black dust. All that stuff is getting into our lungs. It's why so many kids of color have asthma. But guess what? Do you see who lives in the Oakland Hills? Wealthy people live in the Oakland Hills. Well, what is their air quality like? Well, their air quality is clearly better. I mean, it's not even red. And there's a freeway up there too. But guess what? They don't allow trucks on the 580 freeway. This is environmental racism. Do you know that people in my neighborhood live 7 to 12 years less than people in the Oakland Hills? That means that I will live less just because of where I live. And if you want to look at West Oakland is worse. West Oakland is all red. And so we have to really understand racism is not just somebody discriminating against you. It's not just locking people up. It's literally the air we breathe and the food that we eat. Because the other problem is, if I try to go eat up in Fruitvale, what do I have? Oh, McDonald's, Wendy's, all of these things. And then we wonder why so many of our young people are sick. Our people are sick. Black and Latino people's, the #1 cause of death is related to what we eat. And so these are the kinds of things that I like to talk about in my art, which is the things that you can't see. You can't see environmental racism. It is so invisible. But you see it here because California finally passed a law that said people have to be able to know what they're breathing, where they live. The problem is if I wanted to move, I can't afford to live up in the hills. So it's just, you understand, like, it's so messed up that we have to live in places that make us sick. And it's like that in the Central Valley as well. It's basically like that in every single neighborhood of color. You look up East LA, Compton, look it up on the Cal Enviro screen. That's what it's called, Cal Enviro screen. Same thing, red. South LA, red. Beverly Hills, green. So in my art, that's why I'm very much an environmentalist and I care about these things because I want to educate people around this, and I want to inspire people to get involved in these issues and learn about what these issues are and become active. This is one of my art pieces that I did for the People's Climate March in 2014. And this is one of the pieces that I did. It's called Freedom, Justice, Voice, Power, which shows people organizing together to try to fight for a better future. And so my art is really, I do it so I inspire people, but I also do it as a way to record our stories and to really record what's happening right now, because I think we're in a very dynamic time. I went to the March for Our Lives on this Saturday, And when we talk about people's stories, those kids didn't have to say anything. They didn't have to say anything. They could have just, grieved on their own. But they were so outraged that these little 16, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids were like, come on, adults. Come on, get it together. And they told their stories on social media and on national TV, and they have inspired a movement. It has only been about 5 weeks since the Parkland shooting. And so this really is an example of how stories can transform anything. I mean, you now have, can you believe that it took, because I've been following the NRA for a while to see, they're evil. Even after all the shootings, those guys just go and count their money. And to see how these high school students, they're high school students, y'all, they're just taking them down. And they are so powerful. Did you guys hear the 11-year-old? The 11-year-old girl who basically said, hey, we don't talk about black women's deaths the way we talk about white kids' deaths, and we got to do something about it. She was 11 years old. She's 11. And to have young people say that to me is very powerful, but it also tells me that we need more people telling their stories. I'm sure there's a lot of 11-year-olds like her who are just dying to say something, and we need to think about how to give them the platform to say something. And as an artist, that's something that I very much think about, which is we all need to have a voice. All of you have a voice as well. For me, it comes out in my visual art, but it could also come out on the radio. You could write something. Maybe you want to make a song. Maybe you want to make something. You want to write a story. Or you just want to share what happened to you in your life. I really encourage you to do that because I think that what we're most missing, I think that we need to be all sharing our stories and finding ways to really share our truth in order to move people and to help them understand how we can build a better world for all of us. So I'll stop there so that we can do some questions. This is the way you can follow me. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter. And I always have events. I'm going to have a big open studio in June that I will be posting on my Instagram, so you can follow me there. And then you can come check out my exhibits. But thank you so much, everyone, and we can open it up to questions now. Thank you. Yes?
Are you based out of East Oakland still?
Yes, I am based, well, I have my home is in East Oakland. And testing, does this thing go off? I think it might have gone off. Oh yeah, I think it died. Oh, it's okay, it died just in time though, right? There we go. Okay, so my home is in East Oakland in the Fruitvale, and my studio is in West Oakland. Other questions, thoughts? Yes?
I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about the cultural organizing.
Yes, cultural organizing. So I think this thing died already. It's okay though. So what cultural organizing is? So you saw that I'm an artist and I work with other artists, musicians, people who make TV shows. I work with other creative people. And what we do, we don't organize people to vote, right? We're not out there, I mean, sometimes we march, but our job is not to organize marches. It just keeps dying.
Okay, it's out.
Yeah, our job is not to organize marches. Our job is to make stories. And so when my friends say, hey, Favi, I'm a peace out for 2 or 3 weeks. Don't talk to me because I'm working on my novel. I say, that's great. You should totally take time to do that and I will not bother you. When I tell my activist friends sometimes, hey, I need to take some time off to work on my art, they're like, oh, well, you ain't doing the real work. You're not really, you ain't out here, putting in the work. And I think that that's such a, it's not a useful idea that we have. I think cultural organizing means we organize people through culture, through the arts, through music, through TV. And in order for me to be really good at what I do, I have to go do it. I have to go be in my studio, or I have to go make music, or I have to go write a story. I can't be doing frontline work. So that's what cultural organizing is. It's really recognizing the unique contributions of creative people and organizing creative people to do better. Yes.
No, I came in late, but I know like the butterfly that you created has really become, I know at my previous institution, we used it for our undocumented student programming. So I know it's been used a lot in the undocumented
Movement.
movement. Did you anticipate that, or like?
I actually didn't, and it's so amazing that it did, but what it tells me is that we need new symbols. We need symbols to move people, and even though we think a symbol, well, what is a symbol going to do? A symbol can be so powerful, just like the pink triangle. So I'm realizing now that I want to create a new symbol that's about like people of color being environmentalists. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to think, what is it going to take? So I didn't realize it would be so popular, but I also know that people, at the end of the day, we're human creatures and we like color and symbols. So I wasn't necessarily surprised, but I was just like, whoa, this thing really took off. Because I made it in 2012. So it's been 6 years and it's like still taking off. Other questions? Yes.
So I teach math, and math is, I would argue, a colonized subject. And one symptom of that is that it's so neutral. So would you have any advice for a math teacher, such as myself or my colleague here, on how we can integrate some of this?
Well, first of all, I think math is no longer neutral. Not when you have people denying the truth about science. So science is no longer neutral because people will actually say, oh, your math is not right. But math is a universal language. Math is, there's no bias when math is getting done. And so I think that right now, having languages that are about the truth is very critical. And math is a language of the truth. Like, actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson just wrote a post, and I thought it was great. He said, it has been scientifically proven over and over again that prayers will not stop kids from getting shot. And a lot of people lost their mind, like Neil deGrasse's fans, who were like, oh, you're making it political. And he's like, no, I'm actually just telling you the truth about science. Like, your prayers are not going to stop a bullet from hitting a kid. And science, if we look at the language of science, which tells you that a prayer is actually not any kind of like physical, tangible deterrent to shoot people. And I found his statement so simple and so truthful, which is that we need a language to be able to speak the truth. And I think math speaks the truth. When you look at math and income inequality, and you look at math in terms of how the rich are getting richer, and you look at pay inequity, then math tells you a very clear problem. There's no hiding it. Like data is not gonna lie to you. So I think using math as a way to talk about inequality, talk about rising temperatures, talk about how many endangered species we have lost because of humans, talk about the growth of humans and how much energy we use, pay rate gaps, wealth inequality gaps, how much it actually costs for a student in today's world, in the Bay Area. How can they freaking survive with how much they have to pay? Like, it's like mathematically you can actually show this is not, it doesn't work. So I think that using math for real case scenarios actually helps people leverage the power of science and math to prove their truth. Okay, cool. So we can take, let's take one more question. Any you want to share? Yes.
So I said when I was reading Favianna's bio earlier that I wanted to keep it unbiased because the first time I met Favianna, I was a kid in elementary school while she was in high school.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've been able to follow her work really closely from really early on. And that's when we had the Dolores screening, we talked about women who've influenced our lives. And I want to recognize how important it is to have women like Favianna who say, yes, the activist work is important, but for some of us, that front line is in different ways. For some of us, that front line is through our art. For some of us, that front line is through bringing students of color into these campuses, into these institutions that have historically not been spaces for us.
Oh, yeah.
So I definitely want to give Favianna another round of applause. And also thank our student life director for bringing her
Oh my
here
God,
today.
well, yeah, were you in elementary or middle school?
I was 10 years old when I was an aspiring youth brigade.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Wow,
So-
that's great. Okay, yeah, well, thank you everyone for having me, and please follow me on social media, and you can learn more about the work that I do.